पक्का इजी इजी क्वेश्चन थे, ऐसे ही आते क्वेश्चन। ऐसा क्वेश्चन कुछ नहीं भी है अभी आएगा ना क्वेश्चन, देखना इस पार्ट से ऐसे ही क्वेश्चन आता है। अभी कुछ और क्वेश्चन आने वाले हैं, बट राइट टू इक्वालिटी से वही आते हैं जो मैंने आपको दिए थे। ठीक है, पेन बदल दिया क्या? क्वेश्चन डिफिकल्ट होते कब? एग्जामिनेशन हॉल में, जब आप अंडर प्रेशर रहते हो, राइट? इवन द सिंपल क्वेश्चन यू मेक एरर। ठीक है, एनी डाउट इफ यू हैव related to right to equality? We finished. हाँ पूछो, टेस्ट कभी डिस्कस करेंगे उसके बाद कर लें या अभी करोगे? हाँ डिस्कस होगा उसी वक्त कर लेंगे डील। आज हम लोग पढ़ेंगे राइट टू फ्रीडम। हाँ आर्टिकल 19 टू आर्टिकल 22। वैसे इक्वालिटी और फ्रीडम की लड़ाई है, सारा लड़ाई और नहीं है। There are only fight for two basic things. One is equality and second is freedom. Right? If you look at our nation, freedom struggle, it was a demand for equality. If you look at Indians were demanding equality with respect to the British, and British never actually tried to equalize Indians, right? बहुत लगा ये लिखा रहता है gods and Indians are dogs and Indians are not allowed. कुछ ऐसे जगह होते थे जहां पर ऐसे लिखा रहते थे। And Britishers never granted equality to Indians, right? And Indian always tried to be equal as Britishers. But this was not only the fight of equality during the freedom struggle, right? Women had their own fight to be equal as per with the man. Dalit were their own fight. They wanted equality as per the other social classes. OBC had their own fight to fight to be equal as the, with the, now the second fight was the fight for freedom. Come inside. Ajo. Good morning. Any doubt? Any question if you have? नहीं पढ़ना लिख सब कुछ क्लियर है ना? पक्का? See, right to, she's asked, Article 14. I said Article 14 is a core under the right to equality. यहाँ पर दो चीजें है, equality before law and equal protection of law. Right? Now this is sufficient, right, under the liberal democracy, where there is already equality. But if you see, there is a not equality, there are social, economic inequality in India, right? Inequality on the basis of race, right, religion, and therefore if you look at another article had been added. ठीक है, इतना काफी हो जाता है अगर हम इससे भी हम काफी if you look at the Supreme Court judgment, right, several Supreme Court judgment actually talked about Article 12, Article 14, right, right to equality, right? अगर दूसरा नहीं होता तो भी काम चल जाता। हाँ, because of there was a socio-economic layer, right, in India, and that's why another article had been put, so that the vision of the freedom struggle can be realized. We wanted substantial equality. This is very much formal equality. Look at the formal equality, Article 14, Article 15 clause 1 and 2 talks about formal equality. Article 16 talks about formal equality. We all are equal. Huh? But if you see the, article 15 clause 3, 4, 5, 6, article 16 clause 4, 4a, right, article 17, right, article 18, it does not talk about equality only, it talks about socio-economic rights, it talked about justice, it talked about the substantial equality. What do you mean by substantial equality? कि कहने से केवल नहीं होता वी ऑल आर इक्वल, आपको कुछ करना भी पड़ेगा. What idea? This is something by says, this is something to act, this is something to act. So if you look at this all article which I talked about, that is equity, social justice, these all constitute substantial equality. Okay? And entire freedom struggle was to freedom, the fight for two things. One is equality and second is freedom. ठीक है. एंड इक्वालिटी में भी हम जब जाएंगे तो ठीक है श्रवण्य. Let me talk about right to freedom, and here we have article 19 to 22. We will study approximately 8 to 9 classes in right to freedom. Okay. Now if you see article 19, what is article 19? Can you read article 19? हाँ हाँ 10 पेज होगा, क्यों नहीं होगा. क्या है? See article, look at article 19, right? If you see article 19 gives 6 set of freedom. मैंने rights को आपको लिखाया था. Right is a set of freedom. What is rights? A set of freedom. लिखा है ना? Right is a set of freedom. So if you look at article 19(1) gives 6 set of freedom. Right? What is that? That is article 19(1)(a), right to freedom of speech and expression. Right to freedom of speech and expression. Then article 19(1)(b), what is that? Right to assemble peacefully. Without जोड़ना पड़ा, सोचो जोड़ना पड़ा विदाउट आर्म्स. Otherwise इतना sufficient था. Right to assemble peacefully. नहीं, when you say peacefully then there is no arm. Arm is something symbol of violence. Then you have article 19(1)(c). क्या है ये? Right to form association. Right to form union, association, exact word लिखना पड़ेगा. Right to form associations, सही लिख रहा था. Associations or union, right? Or cooperative society. Right? Now article 19(1)(d), क्या है ये? Right to move freely throughout the territory of India. Right to move freely throughout the territory of India. Territory of India. That is fourth. फिफ्थ क्या है? आर्टिकल 19(1) ई ना या डी ई क्या है? राइट टू डिसाइड and resettle in any part of India. Then Article 19(1)(f). Basically, it was omitted here. What was that? Right to hold and dispose property. Yeah, right to hold and ये पता होना चाहिए क्या था? Disposes property. Now this was deleted by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, right? और एक चीज और यहाँ पर बताते तो यहाँ पर जो कोऑपरेटिव सोसाइटी है ना, this word cooperative society was added by the which amendment of the Constitution? 97th Constitutional Amendment Act, right? This cooperative society, the word added by the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act, okay? And right to move, yeah, and this was deleted by 44th CAA. जो भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट लिख रहा हूं मैं, उसका एक लिस्ट बनाइए. वॉट एवर द जजमेंट आई एम मेकिंग, एक लिस्ट बनाइए. ऑल द जजमेंट, देयर शुड बी अ सेपरेट लिस्ट विथ यू, और सेपरेट लिस्ट फॉर द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट. अब उसको डिटेल में जाना कि 44 तक था क्या, क्या हुआ, क्यों हुआ, राइट? नाउ लुक एट आर्टिकल 19(1) जी. ये क्या है? राइट टू practice and profess any occupation. Right to practice any profession or right to carry on any occupation, trade or business, right? These are the rights. But if you see, ये केवल आर्टिकल 19(1) की बात है. If you see article 19(1), clause 2 to clause 6, it is all about the restrictions imposed by the Constitution on the right to freedom, right? So एक हाथ से आपको राइट्स दे रहा है, दूसरे हाथ से ले रहा है, नहीं, लिमिट कर रहा है. और लिमिट इस कदर है कि पता चलेगा कि राइट्स ही नहीं है. नाउ I'll teach you, what are the limits on right to speech and expression, right? तो एक हाथ से यहां से तो राइट्स दे रहा है. Look at Indian Constitution gives rights from the Article 19 clause 1, but at the same time it actually withdraw rights with the help of Article 19 clause 2 to clause 6. This can be the question. Okay, Indian Constitution gives rights on one hand and on the other it withdraw. ठीक है. Now withdraw जब राइट क्या देता है ये बताना है, विड्रॉ ये क्या क्या रिस्ट्रिक्शन है वो बताना है, खत्म. ठीक है. So there are 6 rights in the right to freedom of speech and expression. Originally it was a 7, right? And 7th was right to hold and dispose property. ठीक है. But it was deleted. Now if you look at article 19 clause 2 to clause 6 imposes some reasonable restrictions, right? And that's why it is called, the Indian Constitution gives rights from one hand and it will withdraw rights from the other. एक हाथ से दिया और दूसरे हाथ से ले लिया, right? Now let me talk about article 19(1), this one, right to freedom of speech and expression, one of the most contested element in Indian Constitution. Right to freedom of speech and expression. So let's discuss it. Now, if you look at right to freedom of speech and expression, it is essential for any individual, right? And for any democracy. A democracy can be called a democracy, right? When we have right to freedom of speech and expression. A person can speak without fear and without favor of the government. Without fear कि अगर मैं कल आज कुछ बोल रहा हूं और हो सकता है गवर्नमेंट मुझे पकड़ ले, then there you have no right to speech and freedom of speech and expression, right? And what do you mean by freedom of speech and expression? You can speak by any language, by painting, by drama, by making short video, right? By writing books, by writing articles, right? By sketching. Got the idea? And it is very essential in any democracy, right? And if you look at this freedom of speech and expression contains several rights. For example, recently Supreme Court had given judgment on electoral bond. दिया है ना? Now people have a right to know about whom, about the funding that goes to the party, right? And that is right under Article 19, Clause 1A. Right to information. So right to information is under Article 19(1)(a), right? Then you have, other rights like right to be silent. Making sense, right? तो थोड़ा लिख लेते हैं, थोड़ा दो चार लाइन लिखिए तो. Give the heading Article 19(1)(a), right to freedom of speech and expression. Right to freedom of speech and expression, not few points, essential points, right? Right to freedom of speech and expression without fear or favor. Right to freedom of speech and expression without fear or favor without fear and favor is an essential element of democracy. Right to freedom of speech and expression without fear and favor is an essential feature of democracy. One can be free to write, draw, play, sing. One can be free to write, play, draw, sing, watch, without fear or favor of the government. Without fear or favor of the government. Got the idea? Ab consider someone is admiring government in the prospect that he will get some exchange from the government. होता है ना? मोदी जी का जय जय कर दो तो मोदी जी कुछ दे देंगे. Right? This is also not freedom of speech and expression. You are doing because you think that some favor you can get it from the government. You are not freely speaking. Right? बोल दो कि लब आजाद हैं तेरे. सुना है? हाँ? नहीं सुना? लाइनिंग सुना है कि बोल कि लब आजाद हैं तेरे. Right? Free, you speak freely without fear. सरकार अगर कितना भी authoritarian हो, you have to speak the truth, speak the just, what is just, right? Without fear or favor. ठीक है, अगर कोई फेवर में बोल रहा है, उसको लग रहा है कि मैं इसको मोदी जी के ऊपर 2 किताब लिख दूंगा तो अपॉइंटमेंट मिल जाएगा, होता है ऐसा, हुआ है ऐसा, ऐसे मोदी जी की बात नहीं है ये, मनमोहन सिंह की भी बात है और इंदिरा गांधी की भी बात है, राइट, बट दैट इज partial freedom. This is not freedom of speech and expression, right? When you have freedom of speech and expression, you can speak freely without fear or without favor of the. Sometimes what happens, you fear, right? I should not write this, this line on the Twitter because the police may arrest me. Or sometimes cartoonist draw, does not draw certain cartoon in the fear that they'll be arrested. Or sometime what happens, the, for example, filmmaker does not make film on certain issue, right, in the fear that they may be arrested. Does it happen? होता है ऐसा, right? That is not freedom basically. देखिए, Article 19(1)(a) includes other several rights. Article 19(1)(a) includes other several rights like right to be silent, right to be silent, right to use, right to information, right to information, right to information, right to use social media, right to use social media, right to vote on nota. I hope you have heard about nota. None of the above. That is one options on ballot paper. Right to vote on nota. Right to freedom of press. Right to freedom of press. And so on. Right to access internet, yeah, you can write. There are multiple rights. समझिए, उसके बाद कुछ भी आप अपने मन से लिख सकते हैं. Every rights, every kind of right to speech and expression derived from Article 19(1)(a). Right? अब मान लो कि कोई उड़ीसा के किसी पे now someone is sculptor, right? Have you seen on Odisha sand? There is a sculptor, right? That is also under Article 19(1)(a). This is a broader article. Anything you write, anything you paint, anything you draw, anything you sketch, right? Anything you write, for example, books, any books you write, or tomorrow you may start your own media channel, right? Now you have freedom under Article 19(1)(a). Or you may be, you will have to be silent. मैं कुछ नहीं बोलूंगा, कुछ नहीं बोलूंगी, ये भी होगा, मत बोलो. हाँ, इसमें नोटा, नोटा क्राइसिस ऑफ लेजिटिमेसी है. नोटा क्या है कि हम नहीं जानते. लेजिटिमेसी मतलब क्या होता है पता है? लेजिटिमेसी क्या होता है? नहीं, लीगैलिटी मतलब नहीं होता लेजिटिमेसी. लेजिटिमेसी का बहुत लीगल लेजिटिमेसी होता है, सोशल लेजिटिमेसी होता है, पॉलिटिकल लेजिटिमेसी. लेजिटिमेसी मतलब क्या होता है? वर्ड सुना है? लेजिटिमेसी क्या मतलब होता है? तो वर्ड तो सुना है, लेजिटिमेसी. व्हाट इज लेजिटिमेसी? वैधता हिंदी में, बट नॉट एग्जैक्ट टर्म, राइट? बट व्हाट डज इट मीन? Sorry, justiciable. Yeah. You are coming very closer. Something which is justiciable. Yeah. Justiciable, right? Anything, yeah, Sonali, Asha, Vanita, anything that you. So what is the legitimate? Yeah. Authentic legitimacy. Yes, she's very near. Yeah, authentic. Legitimacy matlab acceptance, whether you are accepted or not, maybe legally or not. Consider a woman give children, a birth to children after marriage, it is illegitimate. But before marriage, it is a illegitimate. कहते हैं ना, right? Sometimes it's called illegitimate relationship. What is then? What is illegitimate? It is not acceptable. It is not justiciable. Somehow it cannot be called authentic relationship, right? Not acceptable by the broader society, right? So that is legitimacy. And when there is a, you are not accept any candidate that is fielded in the election, then you need nota, na? When you need nota, when you don't accept any of the candidate, right? You don't accept, you don't give legitimacy to any candidate, and then you need nota. And that's why it is called crisis of legitimacy. कंसिडर कहीं पर नोटा का बहुत बड़ा वोट आ गया तो क्या करोगा, क्या होगा अभी बताओ. मान लो नोटा's vote is higher than the all candidate, right? It means now democracy will collapse that day, let me tell you. Democracy will collapse that day. समझ में आ रहा है? So legitimacy मतलब होता है acceptance, whether it is widely accepted by the people, right? Then it is legitimate, right? Now law may back the acceptance. For example, if police carry a gun, it is largely accepted. But consider tomorrow Shiba come with a gun, right? What will happen? Will you accept them? No. बोले ये तो बहुत गड़ा है, तुम भी क्या करोगे, फिर गन लेके आ जाओगे. But both are not accepted by the law. ठीक है? Both cannot be justiciable. समझ में आया? Legitimacy का मतलब ये होता है. हाँ? नहीं, जब कुछ भी पढ़ो ना उसका मतलब सीख. हाँ, anyway, क्या लिखा? Article 19 clause 1A includes other several rights: right to be silent, right to information, right to use social media, right to vote on nota, right to access internet, freedom of press. अगर अमेरिका में देखोगे तो अमेरिका में there is a separate clause for the freedom of press, but in India freedom of press is under Article 19 1A. What idea? Right? Now, if you look at the freedom of speech and expression are not absolute in India. There are some reasonable restrictions. What are those? Right? There are 8 type of restrictions. Right? Now, the freedom of speech and expression can be restricted for, for the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of the state, the security of the state. अभी लिखवाऊंगा. Friendly relations with foreign state, public order, decency and morality, contempt of court, defamation, incitement and of an violence. Right? Look at the variety of, you cannot speak against America. को आएगा पकड़ के ले जाएगा. Right? You cannot speak something, can be called immoral. The morality is not defined ना. Morality is not defined. हो सकता है कि ऐसे तुम ऐसे क्यों आए, घर ऐसे चुनरी होना चाहिए. Morality, look at ईरान में morality क्या है, आपके बाल भी नहीं दिखना चाहिए. Right? The morality differs from society to society. Right? Decency differ from society to society. Anyway, so right, right to freedom of speech and expression, right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 1A are not absolute. Are not absolute. There are reasonable restrictions. Reasonable restrictions mentioned under under Article 19 Clause 2. So Article 19(1) is checked by Article 19 Clause 2. समझ में आया? Article 19(1)(a) is checked by Article 19 Clause 2. Right? Now, according to Article 19 Clause 2, freedom of speech and expression curbed. Freedom of speech and expression can be curbed. Curb मतलब होता है restriction, हाँ? Curbed in the interest of followings. First, right? 8 है total. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and 8th. Right? Sovereignty and integrity of a state. Sovereignty and integrity of India. ऐसे करके. Followings. First, sovereignty and integrity of India. Sovereignty and integrity of India. Second, security of the state. Second, security of the state. Third, friendly relations with foreign states. Friendly relations with foreign states. Third, public order. Third, public order. Fourth, decency and morality. DECENCY. Decency and morality. Public order लिख लिया. Decency and morality. Next, contempt of court. Contempt of court. अच्छा, contempt का क्या मतलब होता है? Demeaning करना, उसको नीचे दिखाना. That is called contempt, right? Next is defamation. 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 अब defamation का क्या मतलब है? Harming someone's dignity. हाँ, जैसे लोग दिया चौकीदार चोर है. हाँ, तो there was a case in the Supreme Court. Right? राहुल गांधी ने बोल दिया चौकीदार चोर है, और किसी ने बोल दिया मैं भी चौकीदार हूं. बोला ना, प्राइम मिनिस्टर चौकीदार है. राइट? तो किसी ने बोला चौकीदार चोर है. नाउ case was filed by Subramanian Swamy in the court. Now Supreme Court said you cannot speak, that can harm someone's dignity. Dignity is very important for any individual. So that defamation. Next is incitement to an offense. Incitement to an offense. Incitement to an offense. अच्छा, काउंट करो तो कितना है? 8 है total. Now, if we compare this with the American Constitution, if you look at American Constitution restricts freedom of speech and expression only on one ground. That is the last one. Last one क्या है? पर incitement to an offense. अगर आपने कुछ ऐसा बोला जो भड़क गई जनता, you have spoken something, riots occurred, then that speech and expression is curbed in US. But in India, you can see we have several restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Look, in the US Constitution, change the paragraph and write, in the US Constitution, freedom of speech and expression is restricted only on the grounds of in the US Constitution, freedom of speech and expression is restricted only on the grounds of incitement to an offense. Incitement to an offense. Incitement to an offense. But Indian Constitution put several restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. But Indian Constitution put several restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Now, अगर क्वेश्चन इस तरह का है कि इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन गिव्स राइट्स फ्रॉम वन हैंड एंड इट विथड्रॉ फ्रॉम द अदर, सो दैट यू हैव टू राइट जो अभी तक लिखे हो, right? And you have to compare with the American Constitution. Look at American Constitution, which actually restricts freedom of speech and expression only on one ground. अमेरिका में अमेरिका के झंडे सिटीजन वगैरह जला दे तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं, उनको जला दो, तुम्हारी मर्जी, तुम्हारा देश है, जो करना करो, but violence is not allowed, right? Recently, if you look at, Trump has, actually made incitement to an offense, right? वो कैपिटल पे चढ़ गए लोग, हाँ, है ना? No, that is an offense. You cannot do that. Otherwise, you can speak anything. Even you can speak against America. You can speak against America. There is no restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. इंडिया में नहीं चलेगा, राइट? इंडिया में तो वो तो अलग है, इंडिया के अगेंस्ट में बोलना, आप वो भी चीज नहीं बोल सकते जो सरकार को नागुजार है. एनीवे, now let me tell you a story about the Article 1951A, right to freedom of speech and expression, right? There are three stories. One story I have told you already about Article 1915 15 clause 4, right? When 15 clause 4 was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act because of the one judgment, right, held by the Patna High Court, right? That was Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar, right? बताया था नहीं, ये नहीं बताया था, नहीं जजमेंट बताया था, कोई बात नहीं बताया था, अभी बताता हूं. देखो, इंडिपेंडेंस के बाद पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंट इंडिया में, there was several challenges. The post independent India had, actually faced several challenges. अब एक तो हुआ यहाँ पर several newspapers started writing or criticizing the government. There was a in Bihar, one one newspaper started criticizing the government. Now, what Bihar government did? Bihar government actually put some restrictions on newspaper. किसने किया ये? बिहार गवर्नमेंट. पंजाब में, वहां पर पंजाब में एक सरकार ने क्या, एक न्यूज़पेपर ने, one newspaper started criticizing the government. What Punjab government did? Punjab government also put restrictions on newspaper. Now in Tamil Nadu, Madras, there is one newspaper called Crossroads, whose owner was Ramesh Thapar, right? And this newspaper was left oriented, left during the 1947, left underground, and they said ye azadi jhuti hai, right? They went underground. Now there are many newspapers who started criticizing the azadi, right? ठीक है कि 100 में 70 भूख से नावाद है, दिल पे हाथ रख के कहिए देश क्या आजाद है. Have you heard about this song? नहीं? जब देश में 100 में 70 लोग भूखा है तो क्या देश ही आजाद है? Now what happened? the government put a restriction on crossroads. This is also newspaper. Look at the three government has put restrictions on newspaper. Now, if you look at this newspaper had extracted power from Article 19(1)(a). Right? Now, this crossroads went to the court, and here the court in Madras, the Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras. This was a judgment. Now, in this judgment, Supreme Court held that you cannot curb restriction on freedom of speech other than the already mentioned in the Constitution. Other than the restriction mentioned in the Constitution, you cannot do that. That was and he said that right to freedom of speech and expression is fundamental to any democracy. Now, अभी मैंने आपको 8 लिखवाए हैं, right? 8 में से ये जो अच्छा कोर्ट ने ये कह दिया, अब स्टेट ने क्या किया? स्टेट ब्रॉट फर्स्ट CAA. The Parliament passed the first Constitutional Amendment Act, and it introduced more restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Now, 8 में से 4-5 जो है ना, that was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Even the word reasonable was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. The word लिखा है ना, reasonable restrictions. The word reasonable itself inserted by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Right? Now, second क्या है? Security of the state. That was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Right? Public order. किसने third या fourth में होगा? Look at public order. This was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Decency and morality. That was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Am I making sense? Now, if you look at the first Constitutional Amendment Act, put some restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Am I making sense? Why is it so? Because in Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras, Supreme Court held that you cannot put restrictions on freedom of speech and expression other than the constitutional curb, the constitutional restriction. तो भाई बाहर से लगा नहीं सकते तो ऐसा करो, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन नहीं बदल दो. So, if you look at many clauses were inserted under Article 19(1)(a). Article 19 Clause 2. समझ में आया? अच्छा, इसके लिए केवल ये जिम्मेदार नहीं था. आपको बताया था मैंने एक चंपाकम दोराई राजन बताया था. चंपाकम दोराई राजन केस, राइट? हाँ, वो याद रखना अलग से. आपको पता है चंपाकम दोराई राजन वर्सेस स्टेट ऑफ मद्रास. यहां पर सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या नहीं करने दिया? स्टेट कैन नॉट extend reservation on the grounds of MBC and OBC. It is a violation of Article 15 Clause 1 and 19 Article 29 Clause 2. And there was a First Amendment Act. Another was, if you look at, another judgment was Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar. Wait. Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar. अब यहां पर क्या हुआ? Now, if you see, after the independence, several government actually framed Land Reform Act. Bihar Land Reform Act, Tamil Nadu, Madras framed Madras Land Reform Act, Uttar Pradesh framed Uttar Pradesh Land Reform Act, right? Because land is a state subject. Land is a state subject, and that's why there several states had their Land Reform Act. अब हुआ क्या कि this land reform had been challenged in the court. Why is it so? Because if you look at Article 31, right to property was a fundamental right, right? And there was Article 13, Clause 2, which said that the state shall not make any law which can violate the fundamental rights. Now, if you see, Land Reform Act was a clearly violation of the property rights, the fundamental rights inserted in Part 3, right? So there was a many cases, many landlord filed case in the court. None of the court had actually struck down the Land Reform Act, but Patna High Court did it. Patna High Court in Kameshwar Singh was a largest jamindar in Bihar, right? And he challenged in the court. Now Patna High Court has struck down the Land Reform Act, right? And if you look at the response of the state was first ये सब एक साल में ही हो रहा है. It was happening in parallel in India, right? Related to freedom of speech and expression, related to reservation, related to land reform, that was happening in parallel. एक साथ हो रहा है. Now, what was the response from the state? The state responded with the first Constitutional Amendment Act, right? And the first Constitutional Amendment Act was added 9th schedule. अभी तक नहीं पढ़ा है मैंने आपको first Constitutional Amendment Act. अभी तक background बना रहा था मैं, right? If you look at the first Constitutional Amendment Act, it inserted 9th schedule, right? And Article 31A and 31B. Why? To counter the Kameshwar Singh judgment. It added 15 clause 4. Why? It countered the Supreme Court judgment in Champakam Dorai Rajan, right? It added more restrictions under the Article 19A2. Why? To counter the Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras judgment. First Constitutional Amendment Act was a landmark, right? ठीक है. नाउ लिखिए, थोड़ा सा कुछ स्टोरी को थोड़ा सा बना के लिखते हैं, राइट? समझना बहुत जरूरी है. नाउ लिखिए, in 1950 Madras government has put some restrictions on freedom of press. In 1950 Madras government has put some restrictions on freedom of press. In 1950 Madras government has put some restrictions on freedom of press. Ramesh Thapar, the editor of Crossroad magazine, Ramesh Thapar, editor of Crossroad magazine, Crossroad, CROSSROAD, Crossroad magazine, again, challenge the government decision in the court. Challenge the government decision in the court. The Supreme Court in Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras, Supreme Court in Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras held that Supreme Court in Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras held that Article 19(1)(a) is fundamental to democracy. Article 19(1)(a) is fundamental to democracy. Fundamental to democracy. Similar judgment was given. Judgment was given by the Supreme Court in Bijebhushan versus State of Delhi. Similar judgment was given by the Supreme Court in Bijebhushan. ये वाला ब्रिजभूषण नहीं, वो अभी वाला जो मैच रेसलर का पंगा था. ब्रिजभूषण वाज अनदर, राइट? ब्रिजभूषण वर्सेस स्टेट ऑफ दिल्ली. What the idea? Now change the paragraph and write. In response to the Supreme Court judgment, Parliament amended the Constitution. In response to the Supreme Court judgment, Parliament amended Article 19, Clause 2. Parliament amended Article 19, Clause 2 and inserted more restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. And inserted more restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. What idea? Now look, we have talked about the first Constitutional Amendment Act twice, right? एक बार जब मैं आपको Article 15 Clause 4 बता रहा था, एक बार अभी बता रहा हूँ. So let's write about Article First Amendment Act. Right, the first Constitutional Amendment Act. First Constitutional Amendment Act 1951. Right. The first CAA was necessitated by 3 judgments by the Supreme Court. The first CAA was necessitated or required. Any word you can write. The first Constitutional Amendment Act was required due to necessitated or required due to 3 landmark judgment given by the Supreme Court. Three landmark judgment given by the Supreme Court. Namely, right, Champakam Durarajan versus the State of Madras. Namely, Champakam Durarajan versus the State of Madras. जो कि आप लोग जानते हो, इसका डिटेलिंग जानते हो, right? I'm not going into detail it. Second, Ramesh Thapar versus the State of Madras. Second, Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras. इसको डिटेल अभी बताया मैंने. Right? Third, Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar. Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar. Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar, in which the Patna High Court struck down. The Bihar Land Reform Act. The Bihar Land Reform Act. ये एक्ट बना था 1948 में. हाँ, अगर ईयर भी लिखना है तो 1948 यू कैन राइट. समझ में आया? The first Constitutional Amendment Act was necessitated or required due to the three landmark judgment given by the Supreme Court. First is Champakam Durai Rajan, second is Ramesh Thapar, third is the Kameswar Singh versus the state of Bihar, where the Patna High Court struck down the land reform law. ठीक है? In the first Constitutional Amendment Act, following things were added. In the first Constitutional Amendment Act, following things were added. The first Constitutional Amendment Act, following things were added. First, ninth schedule. Ninth schedule, which protects all law from judicial review. Which protects all law from judicial review. ठीक है? देखिए, however, इसी में, however, in Vaman Rao, Vaman, WAMANRAO Rao case and IR Kohlo case. केस ये 2007 में आया था, वामन राव का आया था 1990 के आसपास. However, in Vaman Rao case and IR Kohlo case, however, in Vaman Rao case and IR Kohlo case, Supreme Court held that in Vaman Rao case and IR Kohlo case, Supreme Court held that all law kept in 9th schedule do not enjoy complete immunities from the Supreme Court. All law kept in 9th schedule does not enjoy complete immunity. Complete immunity. The Supreme Court change, the Supreme Court paragraph change कर सकते हो. The Supreme Court can review. Supreme Court can review the law kept in 9th schedule. Supreme Court can review the law kept in 9th schedule after 24th April 1973. The Supreme Court can review law kept in the 9th schedule after 24th April 1973 if the law violates basic structure of the Constitution. If the law violates the basic structure of the Constitution or violates the essence of article or violates essence of articles 15, 19 and 21. 15, 19 and 21. What the idea? Now Supreme, First Amendment Act actually put the 9th schedule. Okay? And what 9th schedule did? 9th schedule mentioned that any law which has been kept in 9th schedule would be outside of the judicial review. बट बाद में सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने बामन राव के केस में क्या कहा, बामन राव आयर केलो के केस में कि भैया देखो ऐसा नहीं है कि ऑल लॉ enjoy complete immunity from the Supreme Court. Now Supreme Court can review the law if the law have been kept after the 24th April 90. Why 24th April 1923 1973? Keshavanand Bharati case. Yes. Keshavanand Bharati case. Right. After Keshavanand Bharati case, if the law had been kept in the 9th schedule, then and if that law violates the basic structure of the constitution, or the law actually violates the basic essence of article 15, 19 and 21, then that law can be reviewed or viewed. Reviewed लिखा है ना, राइट? ओ अच्छा, लिखते वक्त दूसरा लैंग्वेज लिखवाया, बट मतलब यही है, समझ में आया? राइट, समझ में आया ना? ओके, सो दैट वाज द फर्स्ट एडिशन 9 शेड्यूल. सेकंड लिखो, सेकंड था आर्टिकल 15 clause 4, which empowers a state to make a special provision सवाल कैसे आता है वैसे रिस्पॉन्स करना है आपको, ठीक है, बट जानना सब कुछ है. Article 15 clause 4 empowers the state to make a special provision for the advancement of Article 15 clause 4, which empowered the state to make a special provision for the advancement of SC/ST or socially and educationally backward classes. SC/BC, हाँ, समझ में आया? देन थर्ड क्या होगा? राइट, लिखिए, इट इंसर्टेड more restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. It inserted more restrictions on freedom of speech and expression, like security of the state, friendly relations with foreign state, public order, decency and morality. ये सब ऐड किया गया कब? फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट के बाद. When it was added after the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Now look at the first Constitutional Amendment Act was very significant in India's polity, right? It was very significant. ठीक है, because अभी तक वो बातें चलती आ रही है. Look at which state gives highest quantum of reservation. Now states are going more, but it was actually Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu was giving 68% reservation. Now states are coming, further more and more reservation. Recently, Maratha had been given 10% reservation. Wahi 75, 72, whatever. Now this can be struck down by the Supreme Court any point of time. तो इसीलिए सुप्रीम कोर्ट और पार्लियामेंट के बीच में झगड़ा होता रहता है. If you look at Maratha judgment, there was already given Maratha reservation was already given by the previous government, but High Court struck down it, right? Then उसको बाद फिर से दिया, ठीक है, फिर से जो होगा वो तो वो कहानी चलती रहती है. ये तीसरी बार है ना, ठीक है, तो ऐसा चलता रहता है. एनीवे, see, Parliament tried to fulfill the aspirations of the different section of society. you to try to understand parliament or the state assembly. A state assembly actually represents the wishes of the people. Now there is a Maratha movement. There was a Maratha movement. Now recently, before this reservation had been given, the Maratha leaders were actually sitting on protest that you have to give reservation, you have to recognize Maratha as a OBC. तो जब ऐसा होता है तो स्टेट को रिस्पॉन्ड करना पड़ता है. जब स्टेट को रिस्पॉन्ड करता है तो फिर सुप्रीम कोर्ट देखती है कि अरे ये तो कह रहा है लेकिन whether you are following constitution or not. Now look at Supreme Court. Supreme Court work is to protect the constitution. Supreme Court is a guardian of the Indian constitution. So Supreme Court tries to see whether constitution is damaged or not. Sometimes it is damaged, right? Sometimes it was convinced कि नहीं ठीक है, damage नहीं हुआ है, चल रहा है, right? So it depends on how you convince the judiciary. ठीक है? Otherwise judiciary कुछ नहीं देखता है, वो आपका argument देखता है, right? Got the idea? ऐसे चलता रहता है. I told you that freedom of press is under this. अगर आप देखोगे, freedom of press is under article 19(1)(a), right? And now there are 2-3 judgment on freedom of press. One is judgment is Indian Express versus Union of India. देखिए freedom of press, article 19+1(a). एक दो जजमेंट लिख लीजिए. In the Indian Express versus Union of India case, in the Indian Express, the लिखना, हाँ, the in the Indian Express versus Union of India case. Case, Supreme Court held that in Indian Express versus Union of India case, Supreme Court held that press play a very significant role in any democracy. Press play a very significant role in any democracy. And it is a duty of the Supreme Court, and it is a duty of the Supreme Court to uphold the freedom of press. To uphold the freedom of press. Right? Recently, now change the paragraph and write, in recently, in Arnab Goswami versus Union of India, you know Arnab Goswami? हाँ, वो कुछ मांगता रहता है जब न्यूज, हाँ सुना है, वो देखा है मैमिक देखा है, मैं क्या मांगता रहता है, हाँ ड्रग्स दे दो मुझे कोई, हाँ अरे ऐसे वो ये कर रहा था, लोगों ने मिमिक्री बनाया उसका, ठीक है, हाँ वो चैलेंज करता है, अच्छा तुम क्या कर लोगे, तुम क्या कर लोगे उद्धव ठाकरे. अर्नब गोस्वामी को नहीं जानते हो? वो चलाता है कौन सा भारत रिपब्लिक चलाता है, ही इज हेड ऑफ द रिपब्लिक भारत. He was a good journalist. Now he's a totally you can psychopath of the Indian government, right? He releases all the news in favor of the government. Anyway, but हमें वहां से नहीं लेना, हमें freedom of press से लेना है, right? Recently, in Arnab Goswami versus Union of India case, Supreme Court held that freedom of press is protected by Article 19(1)(a). Freedom of press is protected under Article 19(1)(a). That is the freedom of press that is protected under Article 19(1)(a. ठीक है, समझ में आया? Now, right to information. There are three judgments where Supreme Court had held that right to information is protected under Article 19(1)(a. एक है, बहुत सारे, ये मैं कल ही लिखवाऊंगा, समझा देता हूं. There are many judgment. Recent judgment is the electoral bond wala judgment, where Supreme Court held that Article 19(1)(a, holds the right to information. So ये कल ही लिखवाऊंगा. अगर कुछ पूछना हो आप लोगों को, यस सोनाली, ठीक है. We will go in detail, very comprehensive, but bit by bit. Keep patience और पढ़िए इसको. क्वेश्चन आ सकता है, कुछ भी आ सकता है क्वेश्चन. आई कांट से कि क्वेश्चन क्या आ जाएगा. एक बार आया था व्हाट इज आईआर केलो केस, राइट. तो थोड़ा मैंने बताया कि जो भी जजमेंट लिखवा रहा हूं, थोड़ा सा 10 लाइन 5 लाइन 4 लाइन जरूर एक लिस्ट होना चाहिए जजमेंट में, क्या हुआ नहीं हुआ, क्या जजमेंट आया. जो अमेंडमेंट एक्ट में लिखवा रहा हूं उसका एक लिस्ट होना चाहिए. अमेंडमेंट एक्ट क्यों हुआ, व्हाई देयर वाज अ नेसेसिटी फॉर अमेंडमेंट. अमेंडमेंट हुआ तो प्रोविजन क्या था, समझ में आया? क्यों हुआ? बिकॉज एवरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट इज नेसेसिटेड बाय सर्टेन कंडीशन. समझ में आया? And every constitutional amendment act adds certain provision, insert certain provisions. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में आपको सिंपल मिलेगा, राइट, कि प्रोविजन क्या है, बट यू शुड नो व्हाई द रीजन, व्हाई इट वाज इंसर्टेड, व्हाई इट वाज अ डिमांड. ठीक है, समझ में आया? आज की कथा यहीं समाप्त होगा. यस सोनाली, आशा, वनिता, टेल मी, ऑल गुड, समझ में आया? या रमेश थापर और बिजरभूषण, या सी व्हाट हैपेंस, कहीं पे ये नहीं लिखा कि फ्रीडम ऑफ प्रेस कहां पे है, राइट. नाउ फ्रीडम ऑफ एसोसिएशन इज देयर, फ्रीडम ऑफ यूनियन इज देयर, फ्रीडम ऑफ प्रेस इज नॉट देयर. So when there was some restrictions imposed on the freedom of press, that press actually went to the house, to the Supreme Court, right, and they claimed that they have freedom of press under Article 19(1)(a), which gives right to freedom of speech and expression. Then Supreme Court held that yes, freedom of press is under Article 19 clause 1(a). For example, right to information is not explicitly written, so you can say freedom of press is implicit in the Article 19(1)(a). There is no explicit. Explicit मतलब होता है clearly stated हो, clearly लिखा हो. Am I making sense? So there are several judgment of the Supreme Court where Supreme Court has repeated this judgment, this argument. Right to freedom of press expression is essential, and if you look at the Article 19(1)(a), which includes right to freedom media, basically press. Yeah. Any movie director, anything documentary, any movie, any things that you can make. No, it was not required, but there are certain law. For example, movie, right? So movie में पहले था, एक था U था, एक था A था, होता था ना? मूवी बच्चों के लिए कुछ अलाउड नहीं था, रेटिंग काइंड था. So there is a board, right? Censor board. Censor board is validated by the law. There is a law, right? Now there is a new law the government has passed, and now movie had been categorized in several layers, right? So there are legal restrictions apart from the constitutional restrictions, right? Because certain movie cannot be allowed to watch by the child, है ना? तो अभी कह रहे हैं, अभी recently there was a amendment to that law, and now there are 3 or 4 category of the certificate. एक तो बच्चों का है, एक 7 years तक का है, एक 13 का है, एंड एक, ठीक है, अलग अलग चीज है, अलग अलग बात करेंगे. There are lots of discussion on this, and if you look at there are many articles that you may read, you may confront this kind of judgment, ठीक है, और कुछ भी जजमेंट मिल सकता है. इफ इंटरेस्टिंग यू कैन नोट इट. समझ में आया? सो आई विल स्टॉप हियर. सी यू सोनाली, आशा, वनिता.